Welcome everyone. It almost looks like this is the women's side and this is the men's side. Can we mingle? Welcome so much. This is the session on the power of procurement. Thank you for that. I will come around after the introduction and give you an infographic which will guide our conversation today. We have an amazing team. We've been working with Citi, Procter & Gamble, WeConnect International, and Accenture in putting together this session. And before we go in to discussing why are we talking about gender responsive procurement and how we do it, I would like to introduce our Executive Director, Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka from UN Women.
Thank you very much. I'm not the most resourceful person in the room on the subject. A lot of people who are resourceful are sitting over there, so I don't want to take too much time, except to thank you for being here, for helping us to raise the bar. As you know that we have these sustainable development goals, which create partnerships between private sector, communities, governments, etc., all of us to work for a world that works better for everybody. Our engagement with Citi, with PNG, with NAMA, with governments, and with you as their partner suppliers is an important part of that relationship, because through you we can create new business opportunities for people who are otherwise falling off the cliff. Because we want to increase the labor force in the world, we obviously want better value for the shareholders, because we're not asking for so much charity than opportunity for people who can add value in the businesses. We are looking at how, through working with you, we could systematically find ways of making the connection between those who look opportunities to be entrepreneurs and those of you who are looking for products. But we cannot find some of these new amazing people that we have never met. Many of them are women. WeConnect in many ways provides that connection, and what we'd like to hear today is how all of these can come together and make the economies work better. Just one statistics I think that is important, just to know how much is out there that we still have to discover. In sub-Saharan Africa, 80% of people who work outside the home are in the informal sector. These are the women, rather, and these are the people who will bring up children who become judges, teachers, nurses, etc., who will be the most important members of society. It is important to make sure that we can lift them from just becoming informal sector to becoming serious entrepreneurs. And one of the link and opportunity they have to move from being informal sector with the threat of being very poor is if they partner with people like you and they can produce products that are critical. But through working with people like us, we help you to go to the people that are market ready, so that you do not do the heavy digging. You actually work with the people that can supply the products at the quality and the cost that makes sense to you. So we'd like to hear from you today. What are your needs? How can we make this work? And hopefully we can offer each other's platforms so that we can create more jobs, more profits, more opportunities, and less poverty together. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear? Okay, good. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Phumzile, for the very inspiring opening. Thank you. Marhaba, everyone. Salam alaikum. We are very thrilled to have you here this morning with us. We will be spending about an hour together. Okay? So with this dream team here, which I will introduce shortly, we are on a mission. We want to make sure that as you leave this room, you are equipped with what is gender-responsive sourcing and how you can get started on your end. Okay? So with no further ado, let me introduce our partner in crimes, we have Elizabeth Vasquez. Elizabeth Vasquez is the CEO of WeConnect International. This is a profit-led and non-profit organization. She's the core competency of WeConnect International is about identifying and certifying women-owned business. And you will shortly get an understanding of why this is of high importance to corporations. We also have Javette Hines. I will try to get it right. She is the director of the supply chain, development, inclusion, and sustainability. Yeah, okay. So at Citibank, okay? And we have Nihal Hashish. She's IMEA purchases leader based in Dubai from Procter & Gamble. Myself, Jamila Belabidi. I am global purchases at Procter & Gamble. And we are thrilled actually again to be here with you to get started on the why and the how of gender responsive sourcing. We've tried to invite as many corporations as possible, not that we want to go against the diversity, but we want to get corporations be sensitive about this topic. This gender responsible sourcing is not negotiable anymore. It's time for action, and we want to make sure that we will hopefully inspire you today, and we will get you back home and start acting against it, okay? So, Anna Falth, who introduced Dr. Fumzile, will also come at the end to help us converge and hopefully turn this into action. Okay, so yeah, before we get started, we wanted to have a bit of a feeling of who is in this audience, right? So we'll get a few questions, and please wave as this corresponds to you. So who is a supplier of P&G or Citi in the room? Well, special thanks to you for making this happen. We do appreciate your investment in this very critical subject. Who is a woman-owned business in the room? Wow, welcome, welcome. And thank you for coming. So who in the room has ever heard about supplier diversity or gender-responsive sourcing? Oh, we do have a lot of work to do. Okay, good, that's great. So, well, again, as I said, our corporations, I mean, this is not the job of governments only. This is not the job of NGOs only. It's the jobs of everyone to drive this to completion. So you, for those who have been here yesterday, you've heard already important facts, and we will just take the time to share those again, because hopefully you will understand the why of this topic, okay? So you have heard yesterday that more than a third of the SMEs available globally are actually owned by women, right? That sounds pretty good, right? More than a third. But let's not forget, these are SMEs, first of all. What is horrifying is, and I'm sorry because the setup is just not working out for us, but 1% only of the spend that is allocated to these SMEs is with women-owned businesses. And you will agree that money is power. If we don't give the money to the women-owned business, they will not be powerful to then drive everything we need for this world, okay? Now, the good news is that there have been very critical reports that if we were to bring these to a more balanced way, if we were to invest more in women-owned businesses, we could add up to $28 trillion in the global economy by 2025. So isn't it appealing to get our economy back again? So now, P&G and the valued partners of P&G, we have about 40 years experience with diversity supplier. Our story started in the US like in the 70s. And we do think, with a lot of humbleness, we do believe that we have a good understanding of what supplier diversity can bring to corporations and to the world in general. And we wanted to just share a bit of a testimonial with you this morning, give you top-level view of what we think this brings to us, right, and to all of us. First of all, innovation and ideas fitting our consumers. Well, those women-owned businesses, right, as we said, majority of them are SMEs. That means that they are small, right? That means that if they don't innovate, they disappear. So they tend to think of innovation as their lifeblood, okay? So as a result, they tend to come to corporations, to governments with more innovative ideas than in average. They are also very nimble, very close to our consumers. They get it fast, right? They don't have all these layers also to convince for decision making. As a result, their ideas, their insights are very powerful and spot on. And for companies like P&G, right, where more than 70% of the decision makers for the purchases of our goods, more than 70% of decision makers are women. So this matters to us to have this diversity in our supply base, okay? Positive impact on community and growth engine. There are very serious reports that says that women reinvest twice more than men in their local communities. Is it through health? Is it through education? You name it, but that's the reality, okay? And also, strong reports says that SMEs will tend to create twice more jobs than large corporations. So isn't it a growth engine? And finally, because they are very close to consumers and the markets, right, and they have this agility that large corporations don't, they tend to come up with the trends much faster, right? And this is what they are why they are valuable for us. So net for our corporations and our valued partners here in the room, we do think that our results when it comes to scorecards, those companies are very often and consistently actually overscoring the average. Okay? Well, thank you so much. I'm going to pass on to my friend Elizabeth.
Thank you, Jamila. Thank you to UN Women. Thank you to Nama for hosting this conversation, P&G for making this possible, Citi for being the underwriter of the report that a lot of this is based on. So, challenges. WeConnect International is a global nonprofit. It was created by the corporations we've been talking about, including Accenture's in the room with us, and EY and others. It's because these corporations had a good experience in the United States with sourcing from women-owned businesses. And they said, well, if it's good business to buy from women in the United States, why wouldn't we buy from women everywhere? But there wasn't a global database of women suppliers. So these corporations came together to create this nonprofit called WeConnect International in 2009. Our mission is to work with partner organizations like the UN and the World Bank, associations of women business owners, chambers of commerce, to go out and find women-owned businesses that want to sell into global value chains. We then self-register them. We have them across 100 countries now. And in over 20 countries, we can actually certify, looking at documentation, to verify ownership, management, and control. So that when the CEOs of these corporations stand up and say, we buy from women, they can prove that that is a true statement because there's a certification standard behind that. And that is now global. It's a universal standard, and these corporations are sharing their knowledge and their experience with governments and with multilaterals. So it's an exciting time to create more inclusive economic development, more inclusive value chains. But it's not easy. These are the biggest companies in the world trying to do business with some of the smallest companies in the world. So some of the barriers that are specific to making this happen include, fundamentally, women-owned businesses are not knocking on the doors of these corporations. Generally speaking, it doesn't occur to them to try to sell to Procter & Gamble or Citibank or Accenture or EY or Walmart or ExxonMobil. So it's really important to create awareness, to provide the intelligence, the knowledge that it is possible to do this. There are women-owned businesses successfully selling to these large organizations, and to encourage them to come and meet actual buyers. So that's the other challenge. They don't have the right knowledge of the market, and they don't generally have the right networks. Very few of them have met actual procurement experts like the ones here in the room. So we have to really work to demystify business, supply chains. It's about relationships and people feeling that they can trust someone, that they're going to sell something or that they're going to get paid, that they're going to deliver a quality product as defined in the specs. So we want to increase women's access to knowledge, to networks, make sure they have access to the resources they need to, for access to finance, to scale. WeConnect doesn't do that, but we have partners that do, like Citi and others. Access to training. So they need to have the confidence to knock on the door of a large organization or to submit a response to an RFP or an RFQ. And so the skills piece of this is really important, developing the capacity of these suppliers to be able to anticipate the needs of large organizations. And it's not just selling directly as a prime supplier to these big companies, it might also be getting into the value chain. How do they source? How can they become a subcontractor to an existing prime supplier? Beyond the challenges, and I think the next slide will share, I'm looking for some magical clicker, it's actually right here. Thank you. Is that we need to set really big goals that we can actually track and measure. So an exciting initiative with here, an announcement was made yesterday, and building on the work of We Connect with Global Citizen, our corporate members made a $400 million pledge to source this amount from women-owned businesses, and especially in developing countries. This was Procter & Gamble, Citi, EY, and Accenture coming together to say that over the next 3 years, in addition to the goals they had already set for themselves internally, there's a stretch goal of an additional $400 million. And this is added to 6 other corporations, each of them also making a $100 million pledge for a total of $1 billion in spend. So that is a huge amount of real money that is available to women-owned businesses that want to sell to these corporations. But we can't do it alone. We Connect and other civil society organizations, we have to be working strategically with the multilaterals, with the UN, with the governments, and with other corporations to make this happen. And so I think on the next slide, we have the definition.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good morning, everyone. Now, that's a lot of money to spend. And before spending it, we need to understand, who are we empowering? What defines a woman-owned business? This is foundationally important. We need to understand the market. We need to understand the baseline that we set for ourselves. And we need to, define the criteria and determine the businesses that fall under this. So there's no universal definition. We are still a region that's embarking on this journey. So we want a balanced definition that's neither too broad nor too narrow. So these are like a minimum criteria we'd like to have, like at least one or more women owning 51% of the business, one or more women controlling the business, and it's operating independently from other non-women-owned businesses. Thank you. Javed?
So moving forward from that, Elizabeth talked about the fact that we are very dependent in terms of working with a We Connect International and working with partners like United Nations. Certainly from a city perspective, P&G, we operate in over 100 or 160 countries in some cases. But we don't know every single country and or region, so it's very important for us to work with organizations that do. They have a better sense of the culture. They have a better sense, in some cases, of the suppliers that we're looking for. So once we take that time to understand, we know our general criteria from a sourcing perspective. We know that we want to work with women business owners who are 51% owned, operated, managed, and controlled. But in addition to trying to identify who's certified, non-certified, et cetera, we do want to understand from a country perspective, from a law perspective, what does it mean in the country in terms of the criteria for working with those particular businesses? What are the kinds of businesses that are operated? And that way, when we identify the 51% owned, operated, and controlled, the kind of services that are provided, we can use that kind of data and information to better facilitate information that then goes to the sourcing managers. Part of the value of also working with the We Connect, once we identify these women-owned businesses, working with some of the other organizations, which may be Chamber of Commerce's, depending on the regions, is that you look to the capacity building to facilitate different kinds of workshops and networking opportunities so that those businesses that are then identified have the opportunity to not only meet corporations such as Accenture and P&G and Citi and EY and some of the others that may be represented, but you also have the opportunity to meet one another. Facilitating that kind of networking really gives us a sense of who each of us might be, what the opportunities are that we're looking for, the additional criteria beyond the spend and the goals that we've established, but then also give you a sense of where it is that you might fit as you identify your own business needs and your strategy.
Thank you. Now, how do we secure management's commitment and why is it essential? Now, to answer that, it's an essential prerequisite to have them on board when developing and implementing a gender-responsive procurement strategy. Without their support, it is very unlikely for the strategy to succeed. So, and it's very important to have also the strategy linked to the company's mission and supporting the business. And to build such a case, you need to have solid and reliable data. Now, before talking about how to collect and go ahead and collect the data, you need to define the objective and the target population. Objective is why we are all here, to support and empower women-owned businesses. So go ahead and ask yourself a few questions. How many women-owned businesses provide the goods and services that your company requires? And what is the benefit of their increased participation in your value chain? And what is the goal you'd like to set to yourself over time? Once you have all this, data collection and analysis will easily flow. Thank you. So after assessing the data you've got, now comes the step of developing the strategy that will help address the challenges that women-owned businesses face. For small businesses, having corporates as a buyer is a catalyst for growth. It provides them increased revenue, financial stability, and opens up doors for larger clients. Rethinking today's supply chain to be more inclusive is a good place to start. Now, before I hand over to Javed, who will talk about the importance of making women-owned businesses a priority, it's very important to understand having a gender-responsive procurement strategy. This empowers gender equality, promotes gender equality, empowers women-owned businesses economically, but it does not mean lowering your buying standards.
So I'll continue here talking about things from a strategic sourcing perspective. So we talked initially, right, about just the partnerships and the engagement. We talked about identifying whether or not a woman-owned business is 51% owned, operated, managed, and controlled. We talked about being certified, but then also there's a process in terms of like being identified as not being certified as of yet. And that also is, as we look into developing countries, what we have to look at, because again, as Nihal said, some part of this will be new for particular regions and therefore new for us. So we have to move forward in a pace that makes sense for a particular region based on the country laws that exist, and then focus on what particular policies might exist or not exist that work well for all of us. So then when we go to the part talking about strategic sourcing, in a procurement organization, strategic sourcing initially is certainly just about goals, right? Identifying in the sourcing organization or the people who make the buying decisions, what are they going to buy? Are they going to buy more hardware this year? What are they going to buy? Is it more advertising and marketing? What are they going to buy? Is it construction? Might that be something that you provide? Is it facilities management? Might it be someone who does the cleaning for the place? Are they going to buy more lecterns? Are they going to buy more microphones? Are they going to buy more chairs? Are they going to buy soft drinks? Are they going to buy food? All of those are the kinds of things that we as actual corporations actually do purchase. We purchase telephones, we purchase the polycoms. So there are probably so many things that we actually purchase that you may not have thought about that you actually might be able to provide to us. So what you see here is really kind of a sample list of commodities. This represents city, but it probably represents almost any corporation that you might think of. What I'd ask that you think about as a business owner, for those of you who are, is where might you fit? Where do you see your own good and service that you provide? You know, are you in a facility sourcing? Are you more business operations? Are you in technology software, workforce services? The key thing when we're talking about data is that we look at data from a corporate perspective, but the key thing for you, and that will be transformational for you, will be what kind of data are you keeping based on your own business needs? What is the path that you've identified in terms of, this is my business, this is where I want to go to in 1 to 3 years. These are the companies that I would like to do business with me. These are the other business owners that I might need to partner with depending on the opportunity that comes up. And then think about, as we talk about, you know, your own process and how you streamline, and, you know, what is the social network or what is the networking that might need to occur? What kind of, like when you're talking about developer rosters and short lists of WBE, those are kinds of things that we actually do, but those are things that you also have to do. put together your own list and your own strategy and kind of short list. You're not going to go after 10 companies at one time, but you might go after 10 companies in 3 years. One company, 3. You may go after 10 companies in 3 years, but you want to be strategic in identifying what those companies are and then what your strategy will be. And then you want to get a sense of whether it's Accenture or EY or P&G or a city. What is it that we're looking at from an award criteria? Are we looking for small and scalable at that time? So are we looking, and do we have a project where you're less than 500,000 and that works fine and that's a good fit for you? Are you really at 1 million and above sometimes? So think about your own self and think about the criteria you might establish. And then make sure that when you get the opportunity to be considered, that you're provided with the amount of feedback that is helpful to you to understand why you either did win a bid or why you did not. And so here again, just from a sample commodity perspective, the one thing I just want to kind of clarify, we mentioned and asked the question about supplier diversity in and of itself. Supplier diversity typically is a part of the sourcing process, but the additional value that a Procter & Gamble or Citi or EY might bring when you have a supplier diversity representative is that person then focuses on the capacity building aspect of it and helps you to understand this a little bit better. We're the ones who actually spend the time to develop the workshops to facilitate the networking that helps to drive that a little bit more. So the next part, what I want to talk about is just going to that when we talk, and we want to make sure we leave time for questions. So when we talk about, I'm going to go to pay promptly because this actually came up yesterday as a question, and I want to talk about that. Typically, within our sourcing process, many of us do have standard terms as a part of that payment process. Usually it is standard and we don't necessarily change it. But there are some instances where we do have to talk about, again, as we go about expanding, we don't want to bring a US-centric process to every single country that we go to. We want to understand what makes more sense from a regional perspective, country law, and for the businesses. That's where also the benefit and value of partnership comes into play when we think about how then do we do that? How do you get to a process where you talk about limiting payment terms and making it a little bit better? So that's the benefit and the value of some of the partnership that we talk about here. And that's how you go to transforming a business culture. How do you go from being a General City and an EY and a Procter & Gamble and you've been doing something for 40 years, but now you need to change it? The key thing first is being very strategic about the process. One for us is really taking a look at what is it that we're trying to do. And the key thing for us is we want to make sure that we actually start from here. What's the corporate policy that we have in place to even drive what we say we're going to do? None of us can actually stand on stage and commit to $100 million without someone at the top saying, it's okay, you can do that. None of us can actually do that without having a plan in place or a process in place that says that as well. So the first thing is to make sure that you have some level of commitment and support to doing that. The second piece of that then goes to all the other things that we've talked about in the partnership when we work with an Elizabeth at We Connect International, where we work with the United Nations to really figure out what's your process, what's the program that you have in place, how comprehensive is it? And so then we take a look at who are the kinds of suppliers that we do business with, what are the needs that we have within our sourcing process, and then getting to that point of what Nihal explained earlier, the data that's necessary. We can't even begin to take a look at suppliers without even having the data to begin to identify from We Connect who suppliers are, the data to identify in a particular region what generally is the makeup. Is it more industrial? Is it agricultural? What is the percentage of the kind of business needs that we have depending on the category? So as we start to track and report that and establish goals, then we begin to develop it more. And then we make sure that we have a continuous improvement plan. But even with that, we want to make sure that we have some kind of communications effort and that we then identify specific opportunities for that plan, share that with our MBEs, and then the second tier piece. And that's the part where Elizabeth mentioned earlier. Yesterday, someone asked the question about tier 1 opportunities, tier 2 opportunities. And what they said was that oftentimes we as corporations are not going to do tier 1 opportunities, so we should just establish or just say that tier 2 is what women business owners are going to get. And that's not always the case. there may be those tier one opportunities, but we have to do all these things, some true planning and understanding, and then you do that as well to make sure what might be that tier one opportunity for you. Tier two is when we work with other corporations, and then we are asking them to ensure that as a part of that contract, they do subcontract some part of that program. So the key thing for us is making sure that we understand what our business culture is, making sure that we have the right goals to establish that, but then in partnership, as a woman-owned business begins to think about doing business with any of us, that you do kind of the same thing. And the one thing that I want to do before I maybe turn it back over to Jamila to see if we have questions, and we can answer any questions, is the one thing we haven't mentioned today is really tying things back to the SDGs. We've talked about the SDGs over the past day or so. We've seen it, for the past year or so, and we talked about a 2030 goal. When we talk about goals, it's not just a goal for corporations or for the government, it's for all of us, including the WBEs. So even as you think about your own plan and process for yourself, think about, of the 17, which makes the most sense for you in terms of strategizing and working on your business. Because the key thing that really excites corporations about you when you're innovative is that you are in alignment similar to their plans and process. So really think about that. And the one thing I mentioned yesterday, as you're continuing to build your business, if you're not already a 5-year business, 10-year business, et cetera, think about different corporations, looking on our websites, looking at our citizenship reports, looking at our annual reports, and getting a sense of who's very serious about their programs, but most importantly, what kind of data they utilize, what kind of data you might also utilize for your own report that you can then share as a marketing plan or strategy, so to speak, as you move forward in developing your business. So this, again, is kind of the business culture and the tracking process we use, along with the SDGs as a driver in terms of how we move forward our business, certainly going on the road to 2030 in partnership with the United Nations as well as WeConnect.
Hey, well, thank you so much, Yvette. I'd like to just build on one of your points before we move on to questions. I mean, we are standing here. We have Peter coming from Holland, from Accenture. We have decided to come all together to talk to the corporations because we believe in the value of all together. We believe in the value of 1 + 1 = 3, right? So we are committed to make sure that we can create this multiplier effect by bringing in all the partners in our supply chain together to deliver against that. We could continue do things in silo, but we will just do micro improvements and micro steps. All together, we can create magic. So, if no other comments, we'd like to open to the floor. If you have any questions, any comments, we are here for you. The first one is tough, but after that it goes well. Any question?
Does he have it? Okay, great.
Okay. Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm co-founder and CTO of The Tempest. It's a media company for diverse millennial women. My question is, and this is to large corporations again, what are you doing to prioritize accessibility as well? Because there are 1.3 billion people with disabilities in the world. And a lot of times companies and organizations are not thinking about making information accessible to everybody. That's something we're doing, but we're still a smaller company. But you guys have the power to really make everything accessible. So just had a question regarding that.
So I know you asked the question of corporations, but as the representative of many of the biggest corporations that are active in this space, I can tell you that many of them are starting with a gender strategy for inclusive sourcing because it's half the population, but they're 1% of the suppliers. So there's a huge gap and a huge opportunity. But the intention is to build an infrastructure and a commitment to inclusive sourcing much more broadly of all different types of underutilized communities, and that includes people with disabilities. And so all of us are very active in partnership with the organizations that are focused on people with disabilities, not just within employment, but people with disabilities who own businesses. fantastic businesses all over the world, and making sure that they too have an equal opportunity to compete and win for these opportunities. But right now, there isn't an infrastructure in place within most corporations beyond the United States where they can actually track and measure how many of the businesses are owned by people with disabilities, or, like I said, other underutilized groups. So this is something that all of these companies are actively working on, but gender is just a really great place to start, but it's not the end point.
Thank you.
Hello, good morning. Thank you so much for this very interesting chat. I think it's very important and it can really make a big difference. This is Mark from Child Hope Group. I work at the sustainability team and I'm driving the diversity and inclusion strategy within the group. If we were to implement and make this commitment to really have a policy to buy more from businesses owned by women, I think we would struggle a lot to find suppliers, especially in the region, because historically most of the businesses have been owned by men. Is there any directory or any place where we could find support whenever we need a supplier to know that that business is owned or managed by women?
So I'll start with that. So I think that's what we're saying. So that's some part of the challenge as we think about some of our programs and where they are, right? The first thing that we have to do is, before we say we're going to start doing business in a particular region, is to understand what's the makeup of the region, what is the culture of the region, and then what are existing businesses currently. So usually what we do, so example, for City, before I came here, I tried to identify who do we currently actually do business with at City, but then what I then have to take that information and do with it is try to work with an organization like a We Connect as an example when I'm looking at women business owners, and then try to assess how many of these business owners that are listed here, actually women business owners, how many are not business owners, perhaps even working with local chambers of commerce. So some part of every strategy before we identify where we're going to go is trying to understand what the country laws are, what the actual suppliers are, what are the actual goods and services that are typically in the region. So I think you have the support initially, at least working with an organization like a We Connect, that can have you first take a look at your own data internally to look at who your suppliers are, how much you're spending in a particular category, and then identifying of those categories which might be women business owners and which may not be. Then if you decide or see that there are no women business owners, then that's your goal to then say, aha, I have my first goal. I want to increase my spend by 5%, 10%, whatever the percentage might be. And perhaps now that I do know, at least I've heard about one, I've come to this conference, and I already know there's a marketing firm here, then you go back and you try to figure out how do you perhaps get that woman business owner certified if she is not, introduce her to WeBank, but at a minimum begin to understand and identify and introduce her to your sourcing process so that you can understand what her capabilities are and figure out how you might want to groom her to be a supplier for your company. And that sounds like a lot, but that really is kind of how the process goes, and that is where the supplier diversity people come in terms of the workshop and capacity building, working along with the sourcing managers who make the ultimate decisions.
Great, thank you.
If I may add, is this working? Yeah, if I may add actually a call for action here. If you're interested indeed and very intentional about that, we do need to continue the conversation beyond this workshop, and we do need to put together the list, right? It's all together, and hopefully there will be enough of a pool so that we can have We Connect International or equivalent, right, to come to the region and help us do that, because we can't in silo. We can't have enough resource. This is a big job, too much of a big job for a single corporation, but all together we can.
And I do want to say, we've talked about the procurement guide, the UN procurement guide. Take that as a resource if you haven't taken a look at that. And I mentioned yesterday, we often get big manuals and no one actually looks at them. But it is actually a very helpful guide, and we had a great joy trying to work to put it together last year. But utilize that as information to really try to help you get started, and then use the sustainable development goals within your own firm to help people tie in diversity and inclusion. You can choose goal number 5. You can choose something else to help you kind of really move forward a program that focuses on inclusion in many different ways.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Khaled Morsi. I'm CEO of Shinker in Egypt. We're a supplier to Procter & Gamble. We do a lot of casual labor, and this is mainly for by a Procter & Gamble term called customization. That means taking products that needs to be put in promotion or repacked. And predominantly the casual labor in our country, Egypt, are girls and ladies. However, they are not coming through a properly structured companies. They come from what we call casual labor supplier. So maybe the type of initiative, and just maybe we can take it also further later, is to help those girls to put together a kind of a union or a company that they have a stake of 51% in order to qualify for the criteria, right? Yes. So we'll try to do this initiative.
Awesome,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks.
It's a P&G supplier.
Good morning. My name is Nkiru. I am trying to, maybe taking off from where he stopped, the issue of building up the capacities of women to make sure that they really get involved in corporate procurement. We've had issues of what we call hijack or tokenism, where women will stand in front as the owners of the company, and at the end of the day, it turns out to be that the real owners are men. So I don't know if the corporate world will have to imbibe, maybe probably expand, probably with the We Connect, on how to be sure that the real suppliers are women-owned businesses. Because most times they come in as women-owned businesses, but they end up being businesses being managed in the real fact by men. Then secondly, on the issue of capacity building, if they could make it a very major part of their responsibility, probably corporate social responsibility, to map out the number of women to bring together and build their capacities. They have innovative products, but probably the products are not fine enough to meet the corporate world's requirements. If they could determine to help these women to come up with a kind of building up on those products, I think it will be an added advantage. Then again, there's something we call mobilization in my own country, where a contract is being given to someone, and a percentage of that amount is given as a mobilization fee for you to go and source for extra funds. When a woman has a mobilization fund, or maybe a document that says, yes, this company is ready to mobilize up to 30% of the total procurement fund, the banks are more willing to engage with such women because they are certain, they are very sure that at that moment, the woman will really get the money and the payments will be made instantly by the purchaser upon purchase. So if these corporate organizations could imbibe in their own goals or in their own objectives, in their own policies, manners of mobilizing funds, procurement funds for these women-owned businesses, I think it would be another major step in ensuring that women's affirmative rights in terms of procurement are secured. Thank you.
Nigeria, and she is a powerhouse. This woman, not only does she have her own business, but she's representing an umbrella of associations, right? Coming together in support of women's economic empowerment, women in business. So she knows what she's talking about. And part of the reason I know We Connect was created by these corporations is because they didn't want to pretend and just build their brand and say, we support women's economic empowerment. They actually want to leverage their purchasing power. So if they're going to go out of their way to try to find women to compete for their business, they need to certify that those are in fact women-owned businesses, so that we can actually track and measure impact on the women, and in turn, how those women spend their money on their employees, their families, and their communities. And so it is important to have standards in this space. And I'm very proud to represent the organization that was created to do that in partnership with you and organizations like yours, because we are focused on the access to markets and certification, but all the other ecosystem issues, the challenges, the training that you do, the all the different aspects of helping them to start and grow a business are absolutely critical, which is why we all have to do a better job of more effectively working together. And then I think you had another point on working with the corporations. And so I think to the degree we can continue to provide platforms like this where we can all come together and think about strategies, I think we'll be a lot more effective going forward. So thank you for what you do.
And just for clarification for certification, where anyone may not understand what it is, beyond just saying 51% owned, operated, managed, and controlled, typically the certification process requires that the third-party organization we work with, they're the ones, and when it started in the United States, it was an organization called National Minority Supplier Development Council, and then Women's Business Enterprise National Council, and then there were others, National Gay Lesbian Chamber of Commerce. But all of them, they take a look at the paperwork of a firm, first of all, to take a look from a banking perspective, tax perspective, that that person is in fact who they say they are. There's a conversation with the person. So in the case of a woman-owned business, the woman would have to talk about the business, engage and share information so that it is clear that she is actually knowledgeable about that business. As it relates to, I think, the capacity building and the workshop orientation, we do a number of those things currently, but I think to your point, we will have to kind of regionalize exactly what we do based on where we are. So as an example, some of the things that we do in some of the organization is taking a look at where corporations or where small businesses fall. So if you're at 0 to $1 million, $1 million to 10 million, 10 million to 50, there may be different kinds of capacity building oriented things that we put together that helps to drive what it is you're looking for. So whether that is navigating the corporate workplace or understanding the RFP process, understanding sustainability, whatever it is typically from a corporate trend perspective that we see as something that's important to us and that our sourcing people are going to evaluate you on, typically many of us on the supplier diversity side then try to make sure that either through this forum or through our membership with organizations like that, that we're the ones helping to develop workshops with that kind of content to help the business depending on the level at which they are.
Sorry, I just remembered what you were saying on the supply chain finance. That's actually a really, really important point that we shouldn't forget. It is so difficult for women in the access to finance space to get those loans if they don't have customers. So if the women have customers and they're selling to these organizations, the banks will chase them all day long to give them loans. Investors will chase them all day long. So we really do have to leverage purchase orders. We have to be able to, the women need to be able to come and say, look at the contracts that I have, here's my pipeline. And then the access to finance will come. It's really hard to do it the other way around and give them a loan and hope that maybe someday they'll get a customer. So we really have to do a better job of linking the access to markets with the access to finance.
Hi, question from an advertising sort of area. Because we work with corporations like Procter & Gamble, and I know that the decision now to work with more women-owned businesses is made from the procurement team, but how are you planning to sort of like change the process of incorporating your decision-making with the marketing team?
Well, I think I can take this one, right? Well, actually, this is almost a mandate. We hate the word mandate, but this is the way I think it just transpires. But there is a mandate from our CEO. In all in the last 2 town halls we had, our CEO was talking about this as a priority for all of us, right? So it's really top down, but it's also bottom up because we have teams we've been very surprised with the engagement from purchases, but beyond purchases, right? And you may know something because I think you're Omnicom, right? Are you? Yeah. So, nice meeting you. So, well, actually, you may know that in Procter & Gamble, we have the chance that the purchases organization has basically the decision power to choose the partners, right? So in collaboration, obviously, with our business leaders and the business teams, but we do have a strong say on who and how we work with our partners. And that basically, this is why it probably shows to you that this is a purchaser's request. Actually, this is a company's request. And I want to make sure that this also, we will probably communicate differently in the future, but this is an imperative coming from our CEO. Does it answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
I also want to add the fact that we have a very strong alliance with PG included and many other companies on the Unstereotype Alliance, which has to do with advertising and marketing particular, how we change the way these big giants market, advertise and project women, and how also in that process they procure the services that feed into their marketing and advertising creativity and products. So the same rules, I think, would apply. And I can testify that I know that the big boss has been talking to me about it. So you're in a good path.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm from Saudi Arabia and we are the partner of PNG as well. So my question is actually previously we have some companies who are owned by only men, and now a woman is more in a business like packaging industry, like catering industry, but they don't have exposure of the export side. So they always ask us how to improve their business through the new trends, new export opportunities. So how we can guide them, if you have any website or maybe something like that, so we can help them.
I mean, I don't mean it's self-promotion. We're not making money, but they can self-register for free with WeConnect International. So we have women-owned businesses based in 100 countries, many throughout the Middle East. So easily they can go and self-register, which gives them access to an online academy of all types of training modules we developed in partnership with these corporations, with Walmart, on how do they get consumer facing ready, or how do they get their products and services out into other countries, what are the things that they need to take into consideration in terms of legal or being in compliance with various safety, health rules and regulations. So you don't have to take that on because that's not necessarily your core competency. But whatever it is that you do have as a core competency, I would hope that you would develop some type of mentoring or training initiative and take the time to pay it forward, bring them into your value chain, maybe even as a third or fifth tier supplier, so that they can see what it takes to get into Procter & Gamble value chain. And I think that's a really powerful way, just leveraging your purchasing power and sharing your knowledge, that you can have a very direct impact on thousands of lives.
Sorry, my name is Anne Shongwe. I'm with UN Women in South Africa. And I suppose I sort of wanted to speak to the suppliers. We have been going through quite an interesting process in South Africa. South Africa has a law, so I'm addressing the suppliers. South Africa has a law that requires that every company has X% that goes towards women-owned businesses. They also have a fine as a country that if you don't do business with women, you get fined. And one of the things that we've been finding, which is very worrying, and it's something we're having to think about, is that companies say they would rather pay the fine than invest in building the women businesses. And I suppose one of the things we've been trying to understand is what is the cost to you of making that change? So just I think as you've raised now about building these different women's organizations. And a lot of what we're trying to do at UN Women, whether in South Africa or with our office, we have an office in Egypt which covers areas including Saudi Arabia, is to try to work with you through our partners here to actually get to both you as the suppliers, but also the supply chain managers with whom you work, so that we can start trying to help you understand what the actual opportunity is. Why is it good? It's not something you're doing out of the goodness of your heart, but that we've been able to prove that where women businesses are involved, the actual return on investment is higher. And so I don't know how much more time we have, but it would have been so good to hear from a few more suppliers, just to try to hear what is the cost and what is the big barrier for you in terms of working with women businesses. So we talk to supplier companies, and we're trying to build that work more and more so that we can work with you. We make jokes about old boys clubs. And what that means is, you know, some of us might not sit in the golf course cutting the deals, and so we need to know and understand that. So I don't know who else, and I'm sorry I took the mic. But it would be very interesting to understand. And even if we don't hear about it here, I think those are some of the questions we're asking all the time when we're working with suppliers. You know, what would it take? What should we, you know, so that we can be inside your head, so that we know from our side, because sometimes we talk to ourselves as we try to persuade you. So what would it take to be able to convince you that it makes business sense for you and it's actually worth the cost and the investment? So.
I think it's just creating the awareness, because you know, in the primitive communities where factories and logistic centers are usually located, the girls, even if they are sometimes college degree holders, they are not sophisticated enough to think that how they can form a business or come together to create, you know, a small to medium business in a form that fits with cooperation. So I do believe in country like Egypt, the biggest thing is to somebody to bring those girls that I referred to. And as I said, many of them actually are university degrees holders, but because they don't have any way else to make living, they go to do wrapping and packing. So if they, and some of them are really smart, and if you're talking about the benefit, that definitely we see women in general in supply chain in the areas where we work, logistics, are a better element, and that's not being complimenting. It is, as you said, it has real return. So if they are properly structured, I think it can pay back both to us, to our eventual customers like the P&Gs and the others, as well as to those ladies and girls.
And one of the things I would just add and ask the question, so maybe perhaps if no one wants to share or answer the question, on the website, NAMA website, when we registered, it asked for us to take a pledge. So I would ask, if you did not take a pledge, like a personal pledge, it asked for you to choose perhaps two things. I would encourage and or challenge any of us in the room. What are the two things that you take away from this particular conference in terms of working with women-owned businesses? And you came up, you talked about some great things, and you as well, you asked the question about how can you steer and help these women? So take a look at that pledge and then really put in realistic goals or action items for yourself. And then maybe 2 years when we come back, it will be great to understand now who took the pledge or a pledge or two, and then what were you able to do and transform as a result of that pledge. And then also Anna sent around she provided the sheet earlier. You can see also if you go to the UN website where it says by women owned, and it says take a pledge. I would encourage you to go there as well and take the pledge, whatever your pledge might be, whether it is trying to build capacity, but the key thing is how do we move the needle forward in terms of actionable items to increase the opportunities with women-owned businesses. We all believe in it, but then what are we going to do and what's the pledge that we're going to make? Do we have any more questions?
Maybe not so much a question, but a plea, not a pledge, about the people that have some authority to make a business decision that is risky, but calculated risk, about doing new things with women, with people with disability, or any other constituency whose exclusion does not make sense. Just want to tell you a short story of a company that assembles air conditioners where they didn't have women in the assembly line. For some reason, they just had a regulation that women will not be in the assembly line. So it was the guys that were doing the assemble. So one manager came and he said, I don't understand this. I'm going to have the women do the assemble well. Total change, improved quality, less reject, bigger orders, etc., etc. And the rest is history. The law fell away from the company because everybody was in the assembly line. And of course, what didn't change was equal pay. So the women came to talk to us, say, you know, we're making big money for the company. We've changed the law, but we're still not being paid. So, of course, another manager came, and that was what he addressed, and he changed the dynamic. So I think the struggle for equality takes different turns, but usually there aren't losers. We just need these forward-looking managers to come into the space and to make the changes.
Hello, I'd like to add a few comments to Dr. Funzile's comments. I'm Joël Ziliox. I'm responsible for India, Middle East, and Africa purchases. So there was a question about, yeah, it's all very nice. We hear from purchases. What about marketing? What about the rest of the company? Are you behind this, P&G or others? So a few similar examples. We were amongst the very, very first company to hire women in the plants in Saudi. We lobbied a lot to be able to do so, and we were the first company, I think, actually, to get the permit and hired women on the lines working in Saudi. We just obtained permits to have people working night shifts in India, in some of our plants. So it's pervasive in our supply chain, it's pervasive in our culture, it's pervasive in our behaviors. And if I think about the leadership of this region for Procter & Gamble, Mohamed Samir, our president, is a strong advocate of this program, of supply diversity program. So he's totally aware and supportive of the work, and it's part of one of the legs of our sustainability and citizenship program for the region. So here I'm I'm purchases, but I'm representing the actual P&G company here. And you know, I can guarantee you this is a company, and this is a group of companies. It's not easy. We are at the very beginning of this journey in this region, but the opportunities are huge. They are really huge because we come from a bit far behind in terms of capabilities, culture, traditions. So we have to learn as we go. We have to take risks. We have to make a pledge. And frankly, we are not very clear in every single country how we're going to go about this and how we're going to make it. We don't have a plan lined up, etc. We declare we want to do it, and we're going to find our way, and we'll be faster in some areas, slower in some others. We'll learn, we'll reapply, we'll collaborate. But we're creating a movement. And that's the point. You're creating a movement in association with people like We Connect, with UN Women, with the sponsorship of, you know, very senior people here, and we'll do it together. And together we can amplify this and make it happen. Thank you.
Hello, this is Carlo. I'm a general manager at Albasa, a supplier of P&G, and I just wanted to reinforce the importance of what you said before in terms of having a woman involved in the P&G organization in Saudi, because this is thanks to your efforts that we can also implement our culture as a supplier. Because, you know, when we have in front of us a barrier of all the women and an organization that it is strictly based on older value, how can we implement these changes? So it is thanks to your initiatives that we can follow, and I can proudly say that the last key account I've hired was a woman. And someone was looking at me, you know, coming from Europe, okay, what are you doing? And then, yes, thanks to P&G, but also other multinational players that start to have women in procurement, that make us easier to take the decision accordingly.
Thank you very much for that comment, and thank you so much, everyone, for being here and for sharing your perspectives, your challenges, your needs. And it's only through these kind of conversations that we can actually move and do something about this issue. It's obvious from the conversation that there's a clear market failure. It's an information gap. The information gap from the women entrepreneurs who don't know where the opportunities are. There's an information gap in terms of the companies that have a commitment to buy from women but can't find them. And we saw that some of the requests and the needs that we've heard today is about having a directory of women-owned business, put together a list. And this is something that we are planning to do with the colleagues here on stage, and also with NAMA through our flagship in UN Women on stimulating entrepreneurship, stimulating equal opportunities for women entrepreneurs. So this is something that we will continue on our side from UN Women and with our partners here. What we thought, and I hope you all got this infographic, we thought that this would be a tool for you when you go back home, so you remember what we talked about, and be able to also share it with your colleagues. And what we'd really like to see is that we're all committed to this cause. What we will do at 3 o'clock in the side hall, we will have a conversation a little bit broader. As UN Women, we have the Women's Empowerment Principles, and this, what we have talked about today, is Principle 5, and we will have a conversation on all the other principles that is driving gender equality also in the workplace, in the community, and about reporting, transparency, etc. So 3 o'clock, please welcome. I would also like to, one of the comments that we heard is to give feedback to the women entrepreneurs who might not necessarily be successful. For those who were in a session on the virtual learning, this is something that we would like to use our virtual school in UN Women to put resources for women entrepreneurs to better understand how they can better meet the objectives of the companies that are committed. And finally, I would just congratulate all of our colleagues for having made this big commitment of $400 million sourcing from outside the US. And I hope that you can follow suit in also making commitments, whether it's through the commitments suggested by NAMA on the registration website or your own. And we hope that we can drive this together. Somebody mentioned pay it forward. Let's all pay it forward. Let's support and make sure that by 2030 we have achieved gender equality. So thank you finally, P&G, City, We Connect, and everybody else for coming to this session. Thanks.